Welcome back to another Cyrusher video. Today we're going to be going over how to remove and replace the rear triangle on your XF800 bicycle. Step one for removing your triangle is going to be to remove the rear wheel. So I'm going to take this bike and invert it, remove the rear wheel, and then we'll put the rest of the bike on a bike stand. You need to remove the rear wheel. We have other videos on our channel that demonstrates how to do that in more detail. However, basically we're just going to loosen these axle nuts and then pull the wheel out. Unplug your motor cable when you remove the wheel. Before we remove these bolts, we're going to need to take the derailleur off of the rear triangle. So to do that, we're going to want to unthread this 5mm bolt and take the derailleur off. And so we'll just do that by unthreading this bolt. That comes out. There's also a second half to this. So then the derailleur hanger will just pop out, and make sure not to lose that nut. And then while you're here, make sure to remove the shifter cables. Yeah, so the shifter cable was really tight and it was out of adjustment to where I could not make it loose enough to pull it off. So I shifted into 7th gear, which put the least amount of tension on this cable. So just pull them out of the slots, remember the location that they go to. Then you're gonna want to just kind of let this set aside. We won't be able to remove the derailleur at this point because next we need to take the triangle apart. So we took the derailleur off of this side. The next thing you're gonna want to do is take the brake caliper off. Now what you don't want to do is just take the brake caliper itself off. You want to take the bracket as well. So not these two bolts, but these two, because you're going to be replacing the triangle. So just a 5mm, loosen these and take the brake caliper and bracket off at the same time. Plastic clips off that hold your brake line on. So yeah, just take these plastic clips off, make sure you keep track of them, and then you're gonna have your brake line, just lay that over here. So there are 3 bolts that hold the rear triangle onto the frame. You have 2 of them here, one on either side of this counter lever that connects to the suspension. And then you have one that is the bottom bracket axle, and it is covered by some rubber plugs. So you want to remove those, and you can see that it is there. It goes on either side. And I always start with these top 2. The order doesn't really matter that much. However, just start with the 5mm Allen key and loosen it. So remove this one. Make sure to keep track of your bolts. So we have removed the top part of our rear triangle, and what you want to do is you can kind of see that it's already moved, and at this point you want to be really careful to not lose these yellow spacers. That's what allows the triangle frame to pivot when you compress the suspension. So see, I already dropped one, but just pull these out. So we unplugged the motor cable and the controller cable. And there's one cable that goes into the controller housing, and we're gonna need to unplug that and unplug it to remove the rear triangle. And so in order to do that, we're gonna need to remove the controller cover. And it's held on by 4 screws, just Phillips screws. Okay, so we removed all the screws from the box, and then all you need to do is to unplug this right there so that this cable can come out. Here we have our cables that come from our controller, our computer display, and our wire harness. So you're going to need to remove the zip ties that hold them on, and then we are also going to need to disconnect them. Take it and set it aside. So the last bolt we need to remove is the bracket axle bolt, is what we call it. And this is essentially just a bolt with a nut that pulls it together. And so what you're gonna wanna do is get an 8mm, and it's gonna be on the left side of the bike if you're looking at it from behind. So you can look down in here and you can see the bolt And so you're just gonna get your 8mm and loosen that up. So now we'll loosen this 8mm bolt. And you can remove the bolt. However, we're gonna need to pull the spacers apart. Like I said, this is a bolt and it pulls the spacer and holds this onto the frame. So a little trick that I always do is I thread the bolt in about 2 or 3 threads, and then I will actually hit the bolt with a hammer to separate those spacers. So we're gonna demonstrate that now. Use a dead blow rubber mallet so you won't damage your frame in case you miss the bolt. But essentially what you're gonna wanna do is to hit that bolt and try and get it out. We'll try and do that now. Sometimes you have to use this to get it out. And yeah, there you go. Millimeter. Take the bolt back in. Like that. So just keep in mind that we have the spacer and on both sides, like that, and then the bolt's gonna go in and pull those together here when you're assembling the other replacement triangle back on. And now you can pull the triangle away from the frame. However, you may notice that the chain is still attached to the frame, and this is because of the way the bike is designed. The chain gets put on last, and so it gets put inside this frame. So the best thing to do that's going to save you the most amount of time is to break the chain and then reinstall the chain after you put in the replacement triangle. So you have your new rear triangle here. I recommend putting on the bottom bracket first and then putting on the top ones and going from there to the rest of your installation. The bigger spacer goes on the right side and the smaller spacer goes on the left, like this. So I'm gonna put the right spacer in. If it's not seated all the way, you may have to tap it with a rubber mallet to get it to seat all the way. And then you're gonna wanna put your left spacer in. Same deal, if it doesn't go in all the way, you may have to tap it to get it to seat. We got our spacers in. You can put this in. I would recommend that any bolts that have blue Loctite on them, when you take them off, you're going to need to put Loctite back on them when you install them. It is crucial that you do this. Loctite here and install it. 8mm Allen key. Line the bottom part of the triangle level with the bike like you would when you're riding, and then tighten the bottom bracket axle bolt is what we call it. And make sure that that is tight, just as tight as it was when you removed the previous axle bolt. And that is really tight. So next step's going to be putting on the top part of your rear triangle. So remember that when you're installing these, that you have some plastic spacers that assist the triangle in movement. They sit like this on either side. So make sure you get those installed. So what I did was I just kept some fingers on those spacers and then I just guided that in. And so now I'm gonna line it up. Once you have them lined up, don't forget that you have these bolts that need Loctite. So make sure to reapply that. These are 5mm bolts. And then it's crucial for these top ones that you get them as tight as they were when you took it off, because if you over tighten them, you could break the bolts, but also because when the suspension is compressed, these move. So make sure you get them as tight as they were when you took it off. Now that you have your triangle on, it would be best if you put the controller and controller box back on. Remember that this connector sits up inside here, and so these other cables go down underneath the bike. And so it's important to remember that this one is going to be fed up through here and connect to him and sit inside this box, while the others are going to go and connect down there. So we'll demonstrate that, right? Motor cable, the controller cable, the wire harness cable, and the cable that connects to your cadence sensor. Essentially take your cables and feed them through this hole in the rear triangle. And then make sure to get your controller connector, which is essentially what brings power to your controller. Make sure that that's in good shape. Make sure that this is above, that no wire is going to be exposed when you reinstall it. And then from there, you're going to take your screws and put, there's 4 of them. So the controller has been installed. At this point, you are good to connect all of your cables. So we'll quickly do that. Small orange one is your cadence sensor. Each of these cables has an arrow indicating how to line it up. And so you simply line them up, male to female, and Bob's your uncle. If you remember, we have the brake caliper and the bracket, and the brake line goes through that suspension lever, and then it sits on the outside of this frame. So that cable is just gonna rest down in those little canyons. And then this is going to sit back onto the frame. So these are gonna sit like that. You're gonna put these on. Don't forget to install Loctite. And then make sure to tighten these evenly. So our brake caliper is now installed. Is to reinstall our derailleur. There we go. Sits like that. $5mm. From here, if you broke the chain, it might be easier to remove it completely and then reinstall the chain after you put the rear wheel back on. And we're gonna do that in our case. I took the bike off of the bike stand because I'm a firm believer in installing the rear wheel upside down, that it helps with the installation process. Tighten the axle nuts. Putting the chain back on. Basically what we're gonna do is we're just gonna feed it over the chain ring. We're gonna lock it back over here. I recommend putting it on gear 7. And then you're going to go over and under, because that's how chains work. See, we now have our bike fixed and our new rear triangle installed. So that concludes our video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.